Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Patton McDowell, and in addition to podcasting, I'm a leadership coach, a mastermind facilitator, a best-selling author, and a speaker. I love taking these nonprofit leadership topics on the road or into your Zoom room. If you need someone for your next conference or workshop, check out my new speaking page at pattonmcdowell.com for more information. We've got another fantastic conversation for you in this episode. It's with Nathan Chappell and Brian Crimmins. And you've likely heard about their book, which is taking the philanthropic community by storm. Not just because of the fascinating content within, but you can't help but see the word crisis in the title. Yes, the book is called The Generosity Crisis, the case for radical connection to solve humanity's greatest challenges. And as the title implies, this is a wake-up call, because I think many of us have grown complacent with the generally good news that our Giving USA annual report suggests that philanthropy has been steady or growing for basically the last 75 years. And there is good news in our American sense of philanthropy, but Nathan and Brian are going to make sure we understand the numbers behind the numbers, and there are, in fact, reasons for concern. Now, while they are going to explain why this is a cautionary tale for many of us in the nonprofit sector, it's not all bad news. And in fact, they've got great ideas so that you can take what they've learned and apply it to your leadership and assure you can continue to have success if you understand the dynamics of the generosity crisis. Well, after you listen to this conversation, you will want to check out the show notes for this episode. It's number 211. Just go to the new podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com, and you will find links to all of the resources we discuss, as well as more information on the great work Brian and Nathan are doing at their respective organizations, and of course, how you can get a copy of their book, The Generosity Crisis. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Nathan Chappell and Brian Crimmins. Nathan and Brian, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thanks for having us.
I'm excited about this conversation because both of you got a lot of good things to say. And in fact, I'm looking at a book cover right now that has taken the philanthropic world by storm. It is called The Generosity Crisis, the case for radical connection to solve humanity's greatest challenges. And not only is it fascinating content, congratulations to you and your third author, I believe, but you can't miss the word crisis, Nathan, in the title. So, wow, we Americans are pretty proud of our generosity. You're telling me now there's a crisis. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, thanks for having us here. And we often get that question, first of all, I mean, one is that people are tired of hearing about different crises. And it's like, wait, you're telling me now there's a crisis in generosity? And, to be honest, we really struggled with the title of the book for a while because all the data points to the fact that there is a generosity crisis. And I'll unpack that for a second. But there's different ways of dealing with crisis. And, one, you could pretend it doesn't exist, or you could try to cover it up, or you could hit it head on. And so essentially, the generosity crisis really speaks to, 20 plus years of data showing that essentially the average American is disassociating from charitable giving. So essentially fewer and fewer Americans are giving to 501c3 organizations over time. And in fact, the data is pretty stark, showing that there's an overall 16% decline in the last 20 years, just consistent decline year over year over year over the average person who's deciding to give to charity.
Wow.
And to your point, most people think that generosity is healthy and alive. It's because large, national reports come out like Giving USA that shows that giving is resilient, remaining around 2.1% of GDP for the last 40 years. But really what's changing is how the bucket is being filled. And so essentially the bucket is being filled by fewer and fewer people, which means that more ultra high net worth individuals are creating a bigger piece of the pie, or they're making up more of the pie than ever before. And it's created this this issue where the average person just doesn't feel like their gifts are needed or valued as much, and so they're opting out.
Well put. And I admit as one who trumpets Giving USA as the beacon of generosity, this is a wake-up call. And Brian, talk about your perspective on this crisis.
Yeah, thanks, and pleasure to be here. And I'll just add another sort of angle to this from my perspective, which is if you look at data in terms of folks who are just surveyed about whether they consider themselves generous or not, the answer is they do. And for us, as we've gone around talking about the book, it's gotten very clear in my mind, writing the book and now talking to so many people about, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actually the lifeline for many not-for-profits, the revenue, a big portion of their revenue coming from what we call traditional philanthropy. That's under the crisis umbrella. That is definitely, to all the data points, or the comments that Nathan made. And so we're at an interesting place. I think there's more options nowadays to be generous. You can invest your money, you can buy certain products, and they also give back. And so I think if we think back 25 years ago, the way you contributed to society, the way you gave back was by traditional giving to a not-for-profit. And I just think it's actually now one of the things that can be done, but that's all well and good unless you're the not-for-profit trying to make your budget.
All right, well, Brian, let's start with you on this next question. Why'd you write the book? Tell me the origin story, if you will. The three of you came together, but what was the origin and why did you write it?
Yeah, great question. One we get a lot too. Well, Nathan and I met 8-9 years ago. We were asked, they brought us in, my firm, in to help do some work when he was working on the West Coast for a cancer hospital. And it was one of those you love at first sight kind of things, to be honest. It's one thing to spend all day with a client, and it's another to spend all day with a client and then want to go out and continue the conversations you had over dinner or a few drinks. And that definitely, from Nathan and I's perspective, I'll speak for myself, but that was where, he and I were talking about the challenges or the opportunities that we were working on with the client, but also started talking about the sector that we both have been involved in for so long and care deeply about. And I think this topic of, are you paying attention? Are people paying attention to what's actually happening? We kept zeroing in around. And then that started to manifest itself in, why aren't more people talking about it? Then two, somebody really needs to do something about it. And as Nathan knows, he from a podium at a conference we were at in New York 2 years ago, or a little bit more than that, really put a call out, Nathan did, into the audience, which is someone has to write this book. Someone has to sort of put a flag down and describe what's happening. And well, the end result of that, we just decided to
look bounced it back at you, right?
It bounced back very, very quickly to us. And so the last thing I'll say, though, about the book that I just feel is important for me to put out there is that this is not the book I thought we were writing when we started the process.
Interesting.
I thought it was going to be, in my own mind, I thought it was going to be a little bit more of a how-to guide. And as I found myself meeting with Nathan every week and Michael and helping us write it, research it, etc., the bigger themes, what was going on in the world kept emerging in a way for me that I felt like I'm like, well, we can't tell or help or give advice here if we don't talk about what's happening up there, upstream. And so it was one of those really cool things, though, to see the book where it ended, because it's not the book I thought, but just hearing your opening comments are just so humbling, because I hope it's a book for the right moment, for the right time for our sector.
Indeed. Well put, Brian. And Nathan, similar question. What did you hope to accomplish by putting this together?
Yeah, I spent 20 years in the fundraising game, year over year, essentially feeling the effect of the generosity crisis and not really knowing what it was or how it was. But I just, I think through my education background more in economics, I knew I could feel something was different. Every year my goal would go up, but I would look at my data and the teams that I was leading and realize that we were raising usually more money from less people. And about in 2012, I did my first analysis on this topic of the evolution of mega gifts, because I was really curious how the Giving Pledge would either inspire and largely inspire more giving, or if it would detract from giving and create an even greater kind of crowding out effect, which we see in different areas now. And so it was really kind of that initial inquiry that year over year I was just infatuated with Giving USA and always wondering, like, why is it like every year, like when the report comes out, like people are high-fiving each other and like, yeah, we did a new great total, but my team and my organization was having this almost opposite effect. And so it wasn't really until I equated two things, and it was a very simple kind of mathematical formula, which is if giving as a total remained at 2.1% of GDP, which is, giving is very resilient as the economy grows. But if you read the footnotes in Giving USA, you actually determine that essentially what they're taking out of the report that's biasing the report is ultra high net worth gifts. So last year, ultra high net worth gift was a gift of 350 million or more. Those are actually taken out of the report every year because they bias the total.
Didn't realize that.
If you track this year over year, which there's no other longitudinal study to do this, you have to do it manually. But every year, the bucket was getting bigger, like the number was getting bigger. The more that was taken out of the report to not bias it was getting larger. So it's easy math to figure out 2.1% staying the same, but a bigger number here, meaning that there's less people giving essentially. And so, when we look at just simple math last year, if an average gift size of like $131, there's 32 million fewer gifts were made. And so those are real things that happen that we have to come across. And as Brian said, like we would talk about this, I'm like, I was in-house and I'm like, are you, because Brian works so many nonprofits all over the country, and I'm like, are you seeing this? Are other people seeing this? And this is literally like years of conversation back and forth. And we truly tried to get other people to write this book. Like, you write it, Mikey will write it.
Kept bouncing back to you, right?
And part of it is there is a piece of this that we've had to learn to embrace, which is, you don't write a book called The Generosity Crisis to make friends. Like, people weren't buying it at Christmas to put it in stockings for anyone, so it was like, so we're like, but at the same time, and I think I was the last one to be like, go to the publisher. I'm like, do we need to call it this? And they're like, yes, you do. And I'm glad we did, because at the end of the day, I think we've created a safe space to talk about it. And truly, I think from Brian and my perspective, from the very beginning, we had to just, really think about what was our objective in writing the book. And it was really less about whether people liked it or hated it. It was whether or not the book sparked conversation around generosity with their friends, their colleagues, their neighbors, their family. And, again, taking out whether you like it or hate it, if you're talking about generosity, for us, it was a win. And we've just been so, honored that it has. I mean, it sparked a lot of conversation and I think created the space for people to realize, like, our industry is not doing well. And, if we continue on the path that we're on, bad things happen for humanity. Right.
Brian, are you getting pushback? In other words, I'm immediately struck by, hey, Giving USA still serves its purpose. Or are you a compliment to Giving USA, or are you contradicting in some ways, Giving USA?
Great question. I hope we're complimenting it from the standpoint of helping people understand what it is that they put out every year. Right. To Nathan's point, I can only count on one finger the number of people who read and study the Cliff Notes, and it's Nathan. So
I'm not included on that list. So you're right. You're right.
So he did our industry a huge service, but so I hope we're amplifying it, not from the standpoint of rah numbers are up again. More like we gotta look ourselves in the mirror, as Nathan said earlier, and we got to start talking about this and not and stop pretending like it's over there and it's not going to really affect us. Because Nathan's 100% correct. It was, for me, bouncing and meeting with different not-for-profits every day of the week. They were all saying it just in different ways, that they were experiencing the same things. And that's where you can imagine some of the conversations Nathan and I would have over a meal, because we were both sort of like spitfiring this, and he's got his research that he's doing, and I'm firsthand knowledge of just having been with 7 different not-for-profits. And so it came to this perfect storm. But the one thing I do want to say is that sort of, you don't write this book to make friends. As we've gone now a couple months of speaking and being in front of groups and conferences, etc., I feel like something has changed in the tone and the tenor of the audience. And what I mean, the first few times we did this, I felt like, if I had to throw a number at it, I felt like 80% of it was us trying to convince the audience that there is a crisis.
A crisis, right.
And then the last few minutes, they would be like, oh, okay, I believe you now. Now what do I do? It feels like the further out we go, the larger it's now. Like, we have people who've read it, we have people who've talked to book clubs who come up to us before we even go up on stage, and they're like, we get it, what do we do about it? And so I feel like just in 6 months, maybe not even 5 months, 4 months that we've been doing this in a healthy way, the not-for-profit professionals that at least we've been in front of it's now 10% of, just remind me again, how bad, how challenging this might be, but let's get on to what to do about it. And I think that's a great place to be.
I love that, Brian. Well, Nathan, I was going to ask you the similar question.
Yeah.
Any surprises? In other words, that you found as a result of this?
Well, and
reaction, I mean.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I'll go back and for record, to go on record, I'm actually a huge fan of Giving USA. I mean, personally, I'm a donor. Corporately, we're a sponsor. I'm involved in the methodologies committee. I mean, there's no report in the world as detailed or, and longitudinal as Giving USA. We're extremely fortunate in the U.S. to actually have Giving USA report, and no report can do everything. To Brian mentioned this, but it's the interpretation of the report that is really false. And I mean, spending time in consulting and also in my own leading nonprofit practice, I don't think it's been interpreted in a way that I think it could have been. And so that's what we're really trying to accomplish by shedding light. The surprises to me, like Brian, I think what we've seen as a result of bringing the generosity crisis, and we knew that we couldn't make the book a total bummer. It's like so often that we hear like, I got to, page 100, page 99, and I had to stop reading because it was so depressing. And I even told Brian this, but I heard this literally yesterday at a conference. And someone told me they stopped reading it because it was so depressing. And one of their coworkers said, you have to continue reading it because it becomes much more hopeful. So it wasn't even us sharing that. It was a colleague, which was great. But again, it's part of that is like hitting it in the teeth, like straight on, no holds barred. Like there are so many things that philanthropy provides in society that we take for granted. What if those things go away? I think the surprising part and it's what Brian was saying, is that people have all of the feelings that the book is bringing up are intuitive. Like they're feeling this every day. They didn't know how to articulate it, and they didn't really understand like what it was caused from. And I think when we get to this idea of radical connection and this like a new framework for thinking about transaction versus true, this deep connection, most people that get into philanthropy as a profession have extremely high empathy. They're altruistic themselves, and they really resonate with that because it's like that's the essence of why I got in the sector in the first place, and it's been missing, and it's felt too transactional, and technology has swung too far, and so it's like, how do we kind of move back into that spot that drew me into the profession to begin with?
Yeah,
I think that's the part that's really resonating for a lot of people.
I agree. There's both a wake-up call and you're right. We got to read the whole thing, right? So the listeners right now that are like, I've heard about
page
it.
99, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And there are people listening because they've heard about the book and want to learn more. So you two are helping with that. There are also people listening that want to know the cool work you two are doing. And so, Brian, can I start with you? What do you do? And maybe what are some of the experiences that led to the work you do now?
Yeah, thanks. So I've been with a firm called Changing Our World for 22 years and have the honor and pleasure of serving as our CEO for the past, I think, 12 or so, 12 taking over for our founder, Mike Hoffman, who's still our chairman to this day. And we're social impact consulting work that we do. So we help not-for-profits. And what started off as solely helping them with fundraising efforts, which we still do a lot of, that has morphed into helping with communications and branding and sort of change management type stuff. Because you can imagine, as I'm sure people listening know, fundraising touches everything, and so the ability to think about it holistically, we've evolved there. And then the other cool thing about our firm is that we see it from the other side. So we help corporations, foundations, and high net worth individuals give away money. If I can keep it really simple, for companies that involves employee relations, that involves partnerships with not-for-profits. Increasingly, it involves what it is they stand for and care about in society is actually a business strategy. It's a business imperative now for them. So we find ourselves in that intersection, but we see it holistically. And I think if you in some small way see an imprint in the book, it's from about that. It's that perspective that I've personally had, getting a chance to walk around and with some great organizations on both sides of the aisle, all trying to do something good, and so that, but how they were going about their work, which is one chapter, learning what companies were doing to connect with us as consumers, was a lot of things that I hope I brought to sort of just to the conversation as we were writing the book, because there was, I think, lessons not all of them, but I think there were lessons of what companies were doing and brands were doing that I think, and they're doing a really good job of it, but I think not-for-profits can learn from it as well. So, that's where I've been. And I think that's been a lot of the inspiration that helped, put whatever imprint I had in the book came from all those experiences I've had.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Nathan, I don't have to listen to you very long to know that you are a data guy, an expert for sure. So what do you do, and how did you get into the kind of work you do?
Yeah, I'm probably like this weird, like, fish out of water nonprofit.
Probably.
It was interesting because before getting into nonprofit, which I kind of got into on accident back in the year 2000, I was essentially a technologist. I actually started a high-speed scanning company right out of college. I started the first .com that sold skis on the internet in 1997. Ended up in nonprofit, which honestly for me felt like home. But the part that was always a little bit odd was I had this like operational kind of technology kind of bug always as this early adopter. And so really no surprise I spent 20 years in fundraising, like I said, but I got to a point where I just always was like trying to unpack like what was working and what was not working. And I started doing some pretty cool analytics back, around 10 years ago on predicting revenue based on, all the different moves that our organization was having, and all the way down to whether it was an email or a text message or a face-to-face, and really got really good at predicting our internal revenue and whether we'd hit goal. And that helped me sleep at night. And when I went to, like Brian said, we met when I was at a large cancer center. It was just this, idea, looking at the private sector that, the private sector was changing dramatically in its use of machine learning and deep learning to essentially understand consumers in a more personal way. And I was looking around the nonprofit sector and not really finding any of that. And so in about a year and a half, put together a couple different teams, coast to coast, actually, where we built the first machine learning algorithm to predict generosity based on all of our data. And we learned a ton during this time. And so, it was just this wake up call when we were looking at patient acquisition or acquisition of patients giving, where we were on average giving about 0.6%. Our very first algorithm, which is crude compared to what we have now, got 2.1%. So we're like literally just our first stab in a really rough algorithm was 5x over what we had done historically for 40 years. So we knew something was there. And I left, started a company where we patented the first algorithm to gratitude prediction and machine learning. And that is like ancient history, because the speed at which technology changes at this point, we're on what we consider a fifth evolution of AI in fundraising. And so all I do every day now is with Donor Search AI is we work with many of the largest nonprofits in the country. And now, actually, to be honest, we've democratized AI because we push AI into all of our systems all the way down to the lowest level for most of the time for free. And then for our large clients, they get custom machine learning models. So really, for me, it's the desire to unpack the true motivations of generosity, which, by the way, have nothing to do with a person's wealth, has everything to do with a person's connection. Therefore, essentially, AI was a means to an end. This idea that we were raising less money or more money from less people. How do we get to know those people? How do we essentially measure their connection to us over time? And it's been, I think it's really healthy for our industry. So I get to go around the country and talk about, really this idea of how do we, look at generosity through the lens of connection? How do we use AI to measure that connection? And technology to enhance and foster connection. So it's a new world for our sector, and it's something that is desperately needed for us if we have any chance at reversing the generosity crisis.
But Brian, do you see? I'm sure you see the effects of AI and this kind of deep learning in your world. I was going to ask a follow-up question to both of you. Brian, yours was around the kind of social responsibility you alluded to, but how does what Nathan just said intersect with kind of the work you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the connection piece is the big one. I'll just, because for me, Nathan alluded to watching and understanding how companies 15, 20 years ago were using data to connect with us, really had a lot to do with their understanding of us, their ability to talk about the same values they hold that, we as a consumer of that company or that brand may have. And it all comes down to the trust word, I think, the trust economy, as I've been calling it, that the not-for-profit community is certainly in. Well, the for-profit brands have gotten there with the trust because of, I think, them coming across and knowing us and connecting with us. So I see when Nathan and I were, writing the book, and he would talk like he just did to you every Monday night when we were putting our heads together. For me, it was like being in a learning lab for a year with him writing this book, because it just, so much of it, as he said, though, some of it was like he would say stuff and I'd be like, you know what? You're right. Like, it is about connection. If you don't have the, like, and it is the simple stuff, but it's sometimes the thing that's right in front of you. You don't. And when he would come at it, like you said, with his data and saying, like he did, one of our first models was 5x more effective because we did this and we did that. I'm like, yeah. And that's what's been, so it absolutely, it's crystallized for me, my thinking in the consulting that we do, both on the nonprofit and the for-profit side, as for-profits try to play a bigger role in society. How they do that, how they connect, is ever so prevalent.
Indeed. Nathan, I got to follow up, though, for you on that point, because I know there are not a lot of nonprofit leaders listening. They're inundated with AI and the applications of AI. So as a nonprofit leader, do I need to study that? I mean, I know I can bring someone like you in and donor search in, but what is the ramifications of AI for a nonprofit leader right now, and what do they do about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And, I think, to be honest, because I've been working in this space for quite a while, that for many years, I spent the last 5 years trying to convince people that, AI is here, it's coming, and you need to look at it. And at this point, I'm less interested in convincing people that they need it, because it's a given.
Exactly.
AI nonprofits is a given, but the responsible application of AI and effective implementation of AI is really what will make or break nonprofits. So 100%, nonprofits, and we talk about this in the book a lot, is nonprofits are not competing just with nonprofits. I mean, there's 1.8 million nonprofits. They're competing against every for-profit organization in the world that is essentially trying to build connection as well.
Yes.
And they're using extremely advanced AI to do that. So Nike or Patagonia or whoever it might be is spending lots of money in R&D to really, understand who you are and what time, how much do you like them, essentially. And nonprofits have to realize that. So leaders, absolutely. If frankly, I truly believe that AI will not replace fundraisers, but fundraisers or nonprofits that use AI will replace those that don't. I think it's the equivalent if you, had two high school students and one had a computer and the other one had a pencil and a paper. The one that has a computer's output is going to be better, faster. And, it's no comparison to how much more noticeable the effort will be between the two. And that is truly, I think, the digital divide right now between the for-profits and the nonprofits. And frankly, things don't look good if you don't truly not just use the words, work smarter, not harder, but truly understand and embrace this idea and like really think about innovation with your teams and R&D within your nonprofit team on what does it look like to compete in this day and age. I don't think there's a world where you're successful and not.
Thank you. Great explanation. And it's an attention economy, right, Brian, that we're competing in as nonprofits. And you're right, the for-profit community is ahead of us in that sense. So let's move into the classic, as you said, once we get past page 99, we move into what do we do about it discussion. And Brian, can I ask you, what does radical connection mean? Let's start with that.
Yeah, for me, the best way to describe it is if you think of something, often it's hopefully an alma mater. If it's a band, which I write about in the book, my love affair, if you will, with Pearl Jam. And so it's those organizations, the people that you smile, you want to talk about, as Nathan and I talk about a lot, that you bring up unprovoked in conversations, that you want to tell other people about it. For me, that's radical connection really coming alive, if you will. And back to connecting it to the competition of the connection piece. Without it, we argue in the book, and we talk about a lot of it. Without it, you have what we called in the book affiliation, which is just not strong enough anymore. And as we talk about the fight, if you will, the competition for the mind share, the heart share, and then eventually the wallet share, when you have radical connection, all those line up, and people, in this case, speaking of a not-for-profit, they get on board, and you know who they are. They give you money. They give you money without even asking. They're so committed to the cause. I mean, I almost think if you put on a matrix, and if you keep it really simple, and you have 100 donors to your organization, you could probably map the 20, I hope, that are up in the upper right quadrant of being radically connected to you, and those that aren't. And so what it looks like is that how you move people towards that. I just want to piggyback on the answer Nathan was saying earlier. I mean, I think about the ability, and having seen the work product that he and Donor Search AI put out, about really speeding up the grunt work, if you will, speeding up the knowledge so that fundraisers, I hope most of them, can go back to what they're really good at, which is the relational side of things and building those radical connections, and spend their time there versus spend their time learning, if that makes sense. And I think that's what's exciting. And I love how Nathan always talks about it. The AI machine learning is not going to replace fundraising or fundraisers, right, if you will. But I think fundraisers need to strengthen their relational, the emotional intelligence muscles that they have, because that's going to be more in use to create radical connection more so going forward.
So Nathan, are we guilty of just kind of volume tactics, transactional tactics, I guess, is where you're taking me, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it really is, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, and that's just, the reality for everyone who wakes up in the morning. Your attention is being harvested at really high dollar value. Like, I mean, in the result of that. So, the average person receives 333 emails a day and sees between 5,000 to 7,000 ad images a day. It's said in the private sector, Tristan Harris, who was, an early Facebook guy and who made the movie Social Dilemma, that in the private sector, this is a race to the bottom of the brainstem. And a few weeks ago, he came out with a new webinar, and he was actually, he's like, AI has advanced so much, it's no longer a race to the bottom of the brainstem, it's a race to total intimacy. And really, when it's this perfect correlation, because intimacy is where nonprofits have always had the moral high ground. Like, that was where we had this like deep kind of visceral connection with people for a long time that has become much more transactional. The result has been nonprofits kind of just feeling like more is better. So they're grasping at straws to send more email and more channels, to, spend more to acquire a donor at any cost. And, last year I kept all the mail solicitation that I received all year, and I posted this on LinkedIn, but I received 8.7 pounds, right? 8.7 pounds of direct mail. I've only given to 5 of those organizations. And so I think really the all the tension and the pressure to try to get attention has kind of manifested itself in negative ways that have actually turned off more donors. It's this idea that more is better, just send more, and the math will add up. And the reality is, through AI, AI does not believe, in for-profit companies don't believe that more is better. They actually believe better is better. Nike doesn't believe that every single person in the US is a Nike customer. They believe that there's some people that are better customers, and they target those. And that's this is a moment where our industry has to flip the pyramid to get away from this idea that more is better, to really harvest and really prioritize relationship within the organization. And it's even how we define what success is of an organization. Is it revenue or is it relationship? And Brian and I were in, I don't know, some state a week ago, because that was so long ago, I don't even remember. And I think it was Boston, actually. We asked the audience, we're like, raise your hand if you know your revenue goal. And of course, it was 90% of the people raise their hand that know their revenue goal, and the others probably started last week and they don't know what it is yet.
Right.
And this follow-up question was, raise your hand if you know your retention goal or your retention. And 2 people, so out of 100 people, 2% of the audience knew what their retention was. And that's a huge problem. We will not reverse the generosity crisis till it's the inverse. So 98% know their retention goal, because what it means is that our nonprofit organizations are valuing money over people tremendously. People, we got to fill the bucket. We got to keep our job. We got to, and that's how the definition of success has been, this revenue versus how many people did we keep, and what was the net increase of new people that we kept year over year. And so there's a lot to learn. These are lessons from the private sector at this point, and there's a lot to learn. And I think it's how we define success. It's around lifetime value, not about acquisition.
It's fantastic, Nathan. And Brian, I sense some relief in this because I imagine, and I've talked to a lot of these, as you two have, the overwhelmed small shop nonprofit fundraiser that's been told to add, 3 more digital marketing tactics to their overwhelm. But Brian, you're saying just focus on that top quadrant. I mean, I guess I'm thinking, but don't I still need an acquisition strategy to bring new people? Or are you saying no? Just focus on retaining those you have.
Well, the first thing I'll say is, I don't think there's one answer depending on where the organization is on their journey with philanthropy and fundraising. But it is easy, and it often is, where people pick up what we're saying and say, this sounds like major gift work, and, at the top of the pyramid.
Yeah.
And it absolutely is. I would argue, though, no, it's not just for that world. I would argue that if you can begin to, number one, accept this new, it's not new, embrace the relational side of things over the money side. I like to even ask groups that we're in front of or one-on-one, what might you do different if money was not the sole objective? What strategies might you put into place? And so I think for every not-for-profit, I think they need to look at what they're doing and find out where is it helpful? Where is technology working with them, not against them? That's number one. Number two, again, having seen the results of what Nathan's team produces, I find it's always, for me, the aha moment, because that's where the strategy starts. That's where the fun thing starts to come in. And so it might not be that we stop doing, mailings. It might be that we are using social media or online or digital in a different way at this audience, if that makes sense to you. I mean, we're not going after 10,000, we're going after 1,000. Right. And we're talking about these two things because we know maybe they're going to move. They're going to start to move up, and they're going to start to become, and I know a lot of work we've done both with Nathan and on our own to some degree is helping our clients begin to even understand what did $1 million donor to that organization, what do they look like 20 years ago? And who looks like them today?
Yep.
Who's behaving like them today? And that's what I want to look for. That's what I want to help our clients look for, those, because that's the quality over the quantity argument that Nathan was making as well.
Yeah, love that. Nathan, can I go back to your point? If I want to up my game as a nonprofit leader, what numbers should I be tracking? Because you're right. I think most of us stop at just total revenue, money, dollars raised. But tell me what my scorecard should look like.
Yeah, and it's easier to say philosophically, than it is to do, and for a variety of reasons. But really, the number that organizations, if we and Brian and I often ask, like, what does your organization look like when we do workshops? Like, if you prioritize relationship, what would it look like? And really, and actually, I have the benefit of serving on a board where we're doing this, is that the first number that you're reporting back to any board every time is net increases in retention. Second line is revenue. So revenue is a reflection of the relationship. It's not the end goal. It literally is what happens as a manifestation of that connection. And so truly, something that I think is just completely out of whack in our industry is that retention falls, if retention's a priority, it's often like priority number 6 or 10 or 12. Right. It's not number 1. It's usually not number 2. So I don't really think it's that much harder than that. Now, when I said it's easier said than done, often, in fact, I was talking to a chief development officer of a large shop who believes in this idea of relationship and the generosity crisis, says that, well, the challenge is my board, because my board is looking to fill the bucket. The board, right. They're so accustomed to being trained that, the way you measure a nonprofit's performance is revenue and cost per dollar raised. And so, like, how much revenue and how little are you spending? And, so we're talking about a major kind of paradigm shift that needs to happen. Even if leaders believe relationship first, the money comes as a result of that, is the paradigm shift is really going to have to be with boards fully embracing, like, first of all, awareness that there is a generosity crisis, because many of them aren't. And two, like, we continue on this path, the future doesn't look bright. So how do we fix that? So it's not that complicated, but in theory, it is a really big paradigm shift.
I love the fact that you're introducing, I think, in the ears of our listeners, that maybe this is a board discussion topic. We need to educate, right? And then maybe the way we report, because I love that concept. You're saying the lead number should be retention before we hit even total dollars raised.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, and truly net increases in retention. Because if you just had retention and it was flat, you're just keeping your same people, not building that pipeline. So to your point, you can't you have to continue to build a pipeline. So net increases in retention, meaning I'm adding more people that stay longer. And just the small sidebar is that when we measure better donors with AI, they retain around 78%. So when we're using connection first strategies to determine how well does this person know you, AI will pick up not just more donors, but better donors stay with you at 78% in retention versus a newly acquired donors at 19%. So again, major shift in what systems and processes we're using. But I think even more important is what is the definition of success? That you got to start there, and you got to get buy-in and reimagine what your organization looks like if net increases retention was the most important, factor of success.
Yeah, love that. And Brian, I want to go back though to your point too. If money didn't matter, if I was more focused on the relationship side, what do you see? Are there good examples of that? Again, if I'm a listener thinking, all right, so I'm tracking more face-to-face time with this quadrant, or what would be best practice in what you're describing?
I mean, I think it's for the various levels of strategies. I think it is. It could be that we're tracking more face-to-face time, and you can't. You will be freed is the word you even used it earlier. But I think if you start to truly adopt this philosophy, which is more is better. If you move away from that, you will find the time, because that's what I get asked a lot. Like, okay, what you're asking me to do though, how am I going to be able to do this with everything else that I'm doing? And I said, That's the point. The everything else that you're doing, some percentage of that is probably not working, or not working to Nathan's point, or some of the data points. So how do we get you to Nathan's point? How do we get you to the higher quality donor who then stays with you 78% of the time, the stat that Nathan was just talking about? And so for me, when you start to think about the strategy, some of it might be that personal engagement. Some of it might be that we're communicating with them better because we understand them better. I've seen Nathan do his thing, and it's mind-boggling to think of what we used to do, and I'm making these numbers up, but is that we would understand a donor through 4 or 5 data points. Now they're understanding a donor through thousands of data points. The knowledge of the person and your ability to therefore recommend communication strategies, engagement strategies, events, connect with them on a very personal level, which is what, if you're paying attention, what the brands are doing with us and to us, I would argue. Yeah. So I think some of it is beginning to look at it because it's not all the face-to-face as well. I mean, some of it, as I said, is the ability to communicate, the ability to drop a note to them when, because a new book came out that you think they're going to really appreciate.
Right.
It's that
nice touch.
It's those small things that lead to real relationships, which is ultimately what we're talking about.
Well, and Nathan, it strikes me though that I've got to have a more robust CRM. I've got to have maybe staffing more focused on data collection. Is that fair? Or what else are you seeing best practice terms around this topic?
I mean, I think, the best practice is shifting a little bit. In the past, it was always like build more internally. We're really moving into a world where we're able to outsource so much more. I mean, when I built my first model, I hired a PhD. I had hired a bunch of people to do all those things. The reality is that outsourcing, data science is definitely the more efficient way to go. So in fact, actually, like work that we do, we're finding that like when we've had several where like someone had retired from the team, they actually, for half the cost of that FTE, they're actually able to outsource all this work. And so I think that is becoming more of the process. I think most people, if anything, it's realizing that data in your system is not just like a nice to have. It's that, you want a record in case someone wins a lottery and doesn't show up to work tomorrow, versus you need data in your system because AI systems will help provide direction from that data. And so there definitely has to be a much greater emphasis on the importance of capturing that data in their systems and consistently. But the other freeing part of this is that AI, when it's not just using your own data, but it's using lots of data outside, what we call enriched data.
Yep.
We have 1,000 data points on every household in America. When we add client data to our data, it's much more forgiving of the things that the client's missing. And so most people fail to start this because they're like, oh, we're not ready. We don't have enough data. Everyone has enough data. You need to always continue to improve in that. But really, again, I don't see there's any world where nonprofits kind of decouple the need to prioritize, data in their system. So I think it's an evolving thing, but it's also very freeing when, we can look at a person much more holistically, not just from the data we have, but what other data sources exist on the individual.
Yeah, well put. And both of you, again, I've got a list of ideas and topics I want to pursue, and we could continue this conversation, I know, for hours. But Brian, last question for you, again, for the nonprofit listener or the leader listening now. Any final takeaways you would say, or you want them to get from the book, or other things maybe you've already shared?
I think we've touched on it, but I want to double down on it. I think we have to get our boards understanding this. We have to, because true longstanding change probably won't happen if they're not aware, on board, and supportive of it. And
Great
the other
point.
thing I will say, and I'll say the other thing I'll say about that is that many of them, if they're in the business world, this will make sense to them. They're doing it in their companies.
Yes.
And that will be reassuring to them. That trust, the flip, all the things that we've been talking about, they've done in their business models. Now, they may have done it 10 years ago and 12 years ago, or even 5, because they are ahead of us. But this won't be foreign to them. And I think we need to get them on board, because I think the things we're talking about, the goal setting, I think the strategies, the ideas, have to really have the air cover to take time and to pivot and to transition to. So my big lesson to everybody listening would be, first, understand this whole situation, understand how it's affecting your organization, but start the conversation with the board sooner rather than later.
Great point, Brian. Board familiarity should be there. We just need to lock it in, right? Nathan, same question. What do you want folks to take away?
I think leaders really need to understand the tension that is being created by, first, the generosity crisis, and this tension of like filling, increased goals and fewer individuals. Switching to flipping the pyramid, while it sounds easy, creates a lot of tension within an organization, and really that role of change management comes into a huge way. Back in the day, I wasn't a huge believer in the idea of change management. I thought it was just consultants that wanted to make money to
charge you for it.
Tell you, how you
be nice to consultants, please, Nathan.
Be okay with moving the cheese. But at this point, I will say the success or failure of every technological innovation is around change management. And I see this, what's really occurring in our sector is for really ever, there's kind of been this art of fundraising. If you think about like a teeter-totter, the art of fundraising is at the very top. The science of fundraising management has always been at the bottom. And what we're seeing now is this equilibrium between the art and science in a way that's never happened in our industry before. And anytime you move, shift that much in terms of priority, it creates that tension. So I would really say for leaders to not dismiss the uncomfortableness that comes with change, to really lean into it and to embrace it, and to help guide your team through that change. And I will say that just the last part, the freeing part of AI, is AI touches everyone, and everyone's part of the feedback loop. So it's not anymore of like, well, that's something that the back office does, which I hate that term, and the frontline team never deals with it. Everyone is part of an AI feedback loop. Therefore, everyone is going through this change management aspect. So it was a super important aspect to cover.
Well, on behalf of another consultant in this Zoom room, thank you for embracing some of this change management and things. Right, Brian. We gotta keep that going.
Amen to that.
Of course, I'm going to encourage every listener to check out the show notes and make sure they get a copy, if they don't have already, of The Generosity Crisis. But as both of you know, if I could seek a parting gift, Brian, you first. What's a book that's been meaningful to you that you might recommend to our listeners?
One, I read it beginning of COVID, I think it was, recommendation from my brother, called The $1 Trillion Coach. And it's about the leadership playbook from Bill Campbell, who is unfortunately no longer alive, but who was, for those who do know, from what I gathered and read, the guy was so important to so many of the leaders in Silicon Valley, and sounds like he was just someone who understood to his core the concept of radical connection and the importance of connecting with people on his own leadership journey. So it's one of those books where I feel like I've got to continue. I'm going to go back and reread it a second time. And there's only like 5 books I feel that way about, but that was certainly one of them.
That's high praise. Yeah, Brian, thanks for sharing that. That's a great one to add. So, Nathan, what's been a book meaningful to you?
I have to take it in a total nerdville, I guess, area since Brian brought up
No
leadership.
wrong answers here. No wrong
I
answers.
mean, yeah, I mean, in truly a book I just read, and probably one of the most enjoyable books I've read in a while. In fact, like it's the most marked up book I've had in quite a while is called Power and Prediction. It's written by three economists who are looking at the role of AI in society and really crazy things from like the adoption of like electricity and how long it took for, from when it was invented to when actually people were benefiting from it. And it's just super insightful. There's just so many quotable things. If you're at all kind of nerdy and are thinking about the future of AI and systems in healthcare and insurance and in every other sector, Power and Prediction it's a great book.
Love it. Delighted to add both of those to the collection. And of course, once again, encourage our listeners to become readers for the book you two did a wonderful collaboration on. So for all of the insight, I'm grateful. And Nathan, let's start with you. Where can people find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
Yeah, really, the best place is LinkedIn. And so Nathan Chappell, it's Chappell, because most people would pronounce it Chappell. LinkedIn is a great resource. If those that are actually interested in the AI side, we have a non-company owned just side project of mine called fundraising.ai. So they could join that LinkedIn group there and get more information. Really, it's on the idea of responsible AI in the nonprofit sector. And then I'll say this because Brian and I always forget to say, we also have our own website, which you can get to multiple ways, either generositycrisis.com, which is the easiest, or chappellcrimmins.com. And in that, on that website, actually, we have more information about us, but we also have downloads like a book club guide and
Nice.
10 ways to display radical connection. And we have conversation starters around generosity that you can use with your team or your family around the dinner table. So it's a great resource for people that want to essentially take the book and bring it out within their teams or their family.
Do something with it. That's fantastic. Brian, where else can we find more about you and the work you're doing?
Yep, LinkedIn definitely would be the place, although I think I'm 1,327 posts behind Nathan. So one of these days I'll catch up. But also changingourworld.com, the agency that I lead our website there with a lot of the information that we do and some case studies. And so those would be the two primary places.
And Forging Forward, by the way, Brian, because I have to do a shameless plug for a podcast Brian started that is pretty successful.
Yeah. Thanks, Nathan. Yeah, that's a good point. On YouTube, there's just filmed our 95th show earlier today. It's up on YouTube, Forging Forward. We simply started it filling a vacuum when COVID started, just to keep, like you're doing here, to keep the conversation in our industry going. And it's just been, the momentum's been great, and the audience keeps, we're lucky, the audience keeps building. So we keep doing it. So that's I appreciate that, Nathan. Thanks.
It's fantastic. Brian, Nathan, thank you. Treasure trove of resources and insight. Appreciate you joining me on the path, and thank you, and best wishes to all you've got going on.
Such an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you as well. Love the opportunity to come on, and thanks for engaging in the conversation.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Nathan and Brian as much as I did, and came away more informed about giving trends that affect philanthropy, and more importantly, what you can do about them to enhance your leadership and your organization's mission success. Don't forget about the show notes. They are available on our website, pattonmcdowell.com. Just go to the podcast page. This is episode number 211, and you can find out more about Brian and the great work he's doing at Changing Our World, and Nathan and the work he's doing at Donor Search. And of course, make sure you get a copy of The Generosity Crisis so you can be on the lead edge of this excellent study on philanthropy. Thanks as always for sharing this episode with someone else on the path. And if you haven't already, you can subscribe to this podcast. Just go to the podcast page at pattonmcdowell.com. You'll find the follow button, and that will assure you don't miss out on any of our weekly episodes. They come out every Thursday. And if you like this episode, click on the episodes button. It's at the top of that same podcast page. You can scroll through thumbnails of some of our most popular episodes or search by topic or guest name. Thanks for all you are doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now. and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.